Welcome back to the Joe Miller Show, KOAN Hot Talk, 1080 AM, 95.1 FM. This show is made possible by my friends at the McPherson Group Tax Defense. 1-800-BEAT-IRS, BeatIRS.com, serving your tax needs since 1978 with 2 generations of tax defense attorneys. We have online Jim Simpson. He's a published author, columnist for American Thinker, Washington Times, Soldier of Fortune, and others. We've, of course, put up his work at Restoring Liberty a number of times. And we also have a YouTube from a podcast several months ago where he's on this program talking about an article that he wrote on fanning the flames of racial hatred. We're now talking about, though, the existing problem with refugees coming into this country, the security issues they pose, particularly coming out of Syria. Jim Simpson, thank you for being willing to be on the Joe Miller Show to talk about this important topic.
Hey, Joe. Thanks for having me on again.
We put up a story with your permission. The title of it's Get Ready to Say Hello to Your New Neighbors from Syria. You're concerned about what's going on coming out of the Middle East, the conflict there, and refugees that are being resettled in the United States. Of course, we've resettled refugees for decades in this country. What makes this different?
Well, nothing and everything at the same time. I just published a book through the Center for Security Policy called The Red-Green Axis, Refugees, Immigration, and the Agenda to Erase America. And most people don't really understand the refugee resettlement program, and it's flown under the radar while we're all concerned about illegal immigration and, all the other problems we've had. But refugee resettlement is a serious, serious issue. And I explain exactly why in my book. It's an out-of-control program. It uses government contractors who earn about $1 billion a year to resettle refugees, and they have become wildly incentivized by that money to bring in as many refugees as they possibly can.
These contractors include religious groups, right? I mean, the Catholic Church, for example, resettles a significant number of those refugees, or other Protestant groups as well. I mean, we aren't just talking about private groups, right? We're talking about also church organizations.
Well, no, there's 9, they call them voluntary agencies, and 6 of the 9, they are nominally religious organizations. We have Catholic Charities, we have Church World Service, we have Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, we have the Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Service, which I use the acronym LIARS. There's 6 of the 9 voluntary agencies are nominally religious, and I say nominally because there's really nothing religious about what they're doing. They are paid tens of millions, in some cases hundreds of millions of dollars a year to resettle refugees, and they compete for the federal contracts to resettle those refugees, and it's extremely lucrative for them. And they're all their top officers, whether they're reverends or what, are making healthy 6-figure incomes. And there's nothing remotely religious about it.
Your book describes it as an agenda to erase America, but you're also describing, obviously, a major financial inducement to continuing this. Tell us a little bit about the agenda to erase America. I mean, there is obviously a much darker side to all of this. Where do you get that theory from, and what do you see evidence supporting that?
Well, first of all, another fact that people don't realize about the refugee resettlement program, as it's currently configured, it was inspired by the UN. The UN held a conference in 1976 on human settlements in Vancouver, Canada, and it laid the groundwork for Agenda 21, and it also provided agreement on universal settlement goals. One was abolish private property, because private property couldn't be left in the hands of private citizens. It was too important a thing. The government had to control it. Their main thrust in that, their main conclusion was that they sought, quote, equitable distribution of not merely income, but land, resources, and populations. And that became the resettlement agenda. And in 1980, President Carter signed the Refugee Act, which was another monstrosity brainchild by none other than Ted Kennedy. And the goal was to bring in third world people from all over the world to dilute our culture, to make it unrecognizable, to bring in people with no experience with American concepts of the rule of law, of individual freedom, of religious freedom, people with no concept, and frankly, with a lot of people with no interest in adopting the American way of life other than to suck up welfare resources. It is, Joe, a massive Cloward Piven strategy.
So, I mean, the target is not just the United States, though, right? I mean, it's all Western countries.
The target is the West, as it always has been with everything. And I am I never miss the opportunity to point out there are approximately 4 million Syrians that have fled civil war, and now they're trying to get into Germany and France and other places in Western Europe, and the UN High Commissioner is asking us to take 130,000 refugees in the United States. Nobody has asked any of the Gulf states. Now, these are all wealthy states with billions in resources from their oil wealth. They share a language, they share a religion, they share a culture. They are taking zero refugees.
We don't want to destabilize our allies. We want to
we just want to destabilize ourselves. That's
exactly.
Right. And the same is true of the communist countries and the former communists. Russia isn't taking a single one. None of the Eastern European former East Bloc countries is touching them. They're all being shuffled off to Germany and other Northern European Western countries. This thing is a deliberate attempt. It's an invasion. It is not a resettlement. You know, the people that are coming from these refugee camps, they're not merely coming from Syria. They're coming from North Africa. They're coming from all over the Middle East. 75% of them are men. There's only a small proportion of children and a small proportion of women. And that's straight out of the UN. That's not me saying that. That the UN has provided those statistics.
I mean, that's absolutely nuts. I mean, if they really are truly refugees, wouldn't you think it would be families primarily, not, single men? And of
That's
course,
what you would think.
And not only that, of course, you got a higher risk then of them having some connection to jihadist movements, right?
Right, exactly. And the jihadist movements, the ISIS has already said that they are going to use this vulnerability to infiltrate thousands of their jihadists into Western Europe and into the United States. And conversely, here the FBI has said that there is no way they can vet refugees from Syria because it's a failed state. So we will be taking an enormous risk. We've already brought in 1,500, and, there is certainly a compelling humanitarian argument for taking a few of these refugees.
Jim, we're going to go into break here, but I want to talk the numbers in this next segment and also, of course, some ideas that you have about what we can do about it as concerned citizens. Stay with us. Jim Simpson, author of a book, Red Green Axis, Agenda to Erase America, talking about the refugee crisis facing this nation. Stay with us, The Joe Miller Show. Welcome back to the Joe Miller Show, KOAN Hot Talk, 1080 AM, 95.1 FM. We have online with us Jim Simpson. He's a published author, columnist for American Thinker. Washington Times, Soldier of Fortune, and others. He is an author of also a recent book which describes the refugee crisis in the agenda, quote, to erase America, end quote, the red-green axis. Jim, thank you for staying on the show with us and being willing to talk about this very important subject.
Glad to be here, Joe.
Talk first about the numbers of Christians that are being brought in under these refugee programs, because as many listeners to the show know, Christians in the Middle East have been under the gun significantly. Over 2 million have been pushed out of Iraq. It used to be a vibrant, very historic community. Now there are only a few hundred, maybe a few thousand left. In Syria, similarly, since the civil war there started, Christians pushed out. You would think that large numbers of refugees being resettled in the United States would be from that religious group. True or not?
You would think so. If it were a program designed to, show our compassion to the world and handle those who are most desperately in need of resettlement, you would think that would be the case. But in fact, the Syrian refugees, 97% are Muslim and only 3% are Christians. And Christians are being turned away right and left. The UN High Commissioner's role is critical here. The UN High Commissioner determines about 85% of the refugees that come into the United States. He recommends the people. He makes the list. And the UN is heavily influenced by the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, the OIC. And it is the largest non-governmental organization in the world next to the UN, 55 or 56 nations, I forget, but it very heavily influences the UN's decisions about these things. So not surprisingly, we have been importing through the UN's recommendations a disproportionate number of Muslims for many years. Recently, it's been about 140,000 a year through the various refugee, asylum, and other legal immigration methodologies.
Now, what an abomination. We have the United Nations deciding who's admitted to this country as a refugee, and apparently the Congress just simply rubber stamps the financing that goes along with this. Is that true?
Yeah, and it's just like so much of what the left does. They wrap themselves in the mantle of good intentions, and nobody dares question what they're doing, because after all, you don't want to be anti-refugee. You don't want to be seen as some kind of, Cro-Magnon who doesn't want to help people who are starving or fleeing, oppression or war or stuff like that. So the left, just as it does with everything, they look for the hook of compassion and trick people into believing that that's what their agenda is, when their agenda really is to flood this country with so many different problems, people from so many different places, that our country becomes unrecognizable. In Manchester, New Hampshire, the Central High School there's 82 different languages spoken. I visited and spoke to the mayor of Manchester, New Hampshire. The similar story in all the big resettlement target cities, and they're overwhelmed with the problems these people create. Imagine trying to get interpreters for 82 different languages. In Lynn, Massachusetts, they've been forced to take a bunch of the unaccompanied alien children from Guatemala and other countries in the Central America. Most people don't realize that almost every single village from those rural parts of those countries speaks a different dialect. And they're not dialects that one village will recognize next to another. They're completely different languages. So you think about trying to get interpreters for all those people. And now, in some cases, the refugees are suing because the interpreters aren't available for them.
And these communities have no choice about it. It's kind of like the illegal alien children that the feds, shipped all around the country without the voluntary acceptance by these states. I mean, the same thing with these refugees, right? That's
exactly right. The federal government, with the help of the voluntary agencies, selects target cities that have are advantageous for one reason or another. Either there's an existing population, like for example in Minneapolis, Minnesota, tons of Somalis go there. Also in Portland, Maine, and Lewiston, Maine, tons of Somalis, and they're relocated there because there's already an established population. The local community has no say. They aren't even told. Now, the state has to authorize. The state signs off on it, but once again, it's a pro forma thing. The state has no control or very little control over what happens, and the locals, once those people are resettled, after the federal money runs out, which is in a few months, they're stuck, and they've got to deal with these people with their myriad problems.
I mean, it can change the whole character of a community virtually over the course of just a short period of time. And there have been some communities that have actually had their character completely converted. Now, Dearborn, Michigan, I'm sure there are other factors at play, immigration, et cetera. But, I mean, that's unrecognizable from where it was 30 years ago, right?
Exactly, right. And, you know, the other problem is once you get a lot of Muslim refugees or immigrants in particular, you start getting into the hijra problem. You know, hijra is Muslim immigration, and it's a duty of Muslims, according to the Quran, to settle, populate, and take over the places that they immigrate to. So you have all these mega mosques being built in towns where there's 100 Muslims, and then they become magnets for many more, and at the same time, they become a challenge to the local community. And the Obama administration has come along, and now at any time a local community challenges these mega mosques, the Obama administration, through the Justice Department, comes down on the side of the Muslims and sues the town. It's just an incredible situation. It's utterly outrageous, and it destroys property values. And the people that come in are just not nice.
Yeah, we just have a couple of minutes left, Jim. Yeah. You've got a petition underfoot right now designed to help put a stop to this. Yes. Tell our audience a little bit about it, what you hope to achieve, and why this really does have a practical ability to stop what's going on today.
Okay. Well, the petition is called No Refugee Resettlement Without Local OK. And you can find it on our Facebook site, Resettlement Resistors. And please, your listeners, please sign this. In a few days or a few weeks, sometime in September, the President is going to transmit a letter to Congress telling Congress exactly how many refugees he wants to bring in. In the past few years, the ceiling has been capped at 70,000, but now they want to bring in anywhere from 17 to as many as 200,000 Syrian refugees that cannot be vetted. So those are going to be added to the total. And what we want to do is present this petition with 100,000 signatures on it, and we want to demand Congress hold hearings on this corrupt and utterly out-of-control program before we allow any Syrians in, so that we don't wind up importing ISIS on federal dollars.
Hey, who do you have as far as allies go in the Congress right now? We've just got 20 seconds left here.
Well, we've got Representative Babin in Texas, who has proposed a bill putting a moratorium on resettlement, and we strongly support that, and we urge people to ask their congressman to support it, although he's received very little support so far.
Jim Simpson, author of Red Green Axis, Agenda to Erase America. Get the petition, Facebook.com, Resettlement Resistors. Stay with us. We'll be back tomorrow at 2 to 4, The Joe Miller Show.